Thanks for joining us for this episode. And what we're about to play for you is a sample piece of content available via the courses that are a part of our all new Church Advance HQ. We really look forward to sharing the rest of this content with you there. But for now, let's enjoy this sample piece of content from Church Advance HQ as we look forward to continuing a reformation of fellowship, partnership, and gospel hope amongst Bible-believing pastors and churches. This is Church Advance with Brian Sams. So there's a good chance that you have been handling the bulk of your church's media needs yourself. And you probably realize that you don't have the bandwidth to keep up with all of these needs effectively. You know, you might try one of those library online resources where you log in and you can pick from thousands of graphics to download, and those can be helpful, but ultimately you're still the one who has to do the work so that you can make it happen. You've still got to download that file and rework it to work for you. So it's still a lot of work. So you can't keep up with these overwhelming demands on your own. It's just not going to happen. Things are going to start falling through the cracks. It's just not pretty. So if you're at this point, then that means that you're ready to start delegating these media needs to someone else. And so first of all, I want to congratulate you on coming to this very crucial realization. No organization of any kind can grow without delegation. This isn't a leadership lesson necessarily, but it's just something crucial to realize, and it's very crucial to understand in particular, regards in particular to your creative and media needs. So the good, better, and best approaches to delegating your media and creative needs. That's what we're going to be going over in this series. So let's get started with the good approach. And that is to perhaps delegate to a volunteer. Now, this, of course, isn't technically hiring at all, and it's a pretty common approach in churches in general. Churches and healthy, growing churches tend to have volunteers of all kinds. And, and really from a financial perspective, why would you pay someone when maybe someone else is willing to do it for free? Delegating can work for some creative fields, but it should be avoided for others. Here's some situations where it can work. When it comes to like your worship audio visual operation, the lighting, the soundboard, things like that, maybe even live stream equipment, interacting with church online, interacting using the chat feature, something like that. Maybe you've got someone who can do content proofing or editing, before you got something you're going to publish, they can actually proofread it. Many times there's often some really great photographers or maybe even videographers in the church that are willing to take photos and stuff like that. This is all really great positions potentially that could at least be partially filled by some type of volunteer. But you got to make sure you do your research. You got to ask them the questions about their experience. And you don't want to just, oh yeah, I'm a photographer, and they show up with their iPhone. Well, we can all do that, and there's some people out there that can take really great photos with their iPhone, but you really need to ask them about experience and be willing to ask them for a portfolio. Say, well, I'd like to see a portfolio of your work, because if they are, have been doing it for any period of time, in terms of, for example, I'm thinking of photography. Let's use that as an example. And if they genuinely are pursuing this as some type of, maybe side job or something like that, and maybe it's beyond just a hobby, or even if it is like a high level hobby, well, they should have some sample work to show you. They should have a portfolio of work to say, oh yeah, here's what I've done. If you're going to delegate to a volunteer for anything, don't just blindly hand them the reins. Make sure that they do genuinely have experience and expertise in the area, because many times it could be tempting. You're drowning and you just want to hand it off, but you can get yourself into a really sticky situation if they don't know what you're doing. Now, here are some areas where delegating to a volunteer doesn't work, and it really needs to be avoided for. That's going to be the primary design and branding of your church, because in most cases, the more distance and detached a designer is from your church, that can often be a good thing. I'm not saying it always has to be the case, but it actually can be a good thing. And another thing that you want to consider with this is if you delegate this to a volunteer, for example, and maybe it's something with the branding or development of a website or something like that, here's something you have to remember. You cannot fire who you did not hire. You can't fire who you didn't hire. So anyone that says, "Oh yeah, I'll be your designer," or "I'll do your website," and I see this, it's pretty common in churches in particular. But the problem is that they come in and they say, "I'm going to do this. I'm going to, do your website for you," for example. And then, something happens. They're not getting things updated on time and they're falling behind. Well, it's really hard to fire someone that you never hired. And so these big things that are really crucial to your church's, promotional and creative marketing, such as your website and even your main brand, that really needs to be left to a true professional that you're actually paying, because that way, if they drop the ball, you can let them go and move on. And then another area that you don't want to delegate to a volunteer is anyone who's providing oversight or vision of creative content in that type of leadership capacity. Again, this is not to say that we want to limit volunteers from their capacity of, leading others. That's not what this is about. This is about a very particular department when it comes to your creative and your media and your marketing. This job of oversight and general direction, like talking about, hey, leading the whole creative department, if you will, that is definitely something that needs to be left to someone that you can at least pay. Because again, if there's anybody that you want to be able to have that fallback, obviously this is worst case scenario, but have that fallback of needing to let them go or make a transition, it's the person who is kind of leading the department. And so you want to be able to have that liberty to let them go. And also they're going to be able to give, they're not going to be able to give the time and attention that is needed when there are a volunteer in terms of, actually leading and so forth. So I would say if you are going to do that with, you do want to give somebody in your church maybe that type of leadership, well, consider at least giving them some part-time pay, and then also determining maybe some term limits or contracts, agreements like that, so that things actually, so that way, again, you're able to actually, work with that person, because they're the wrong-spirited volunteer, the unhealthy volunteer says, well, you're not paying me, so I'm going to do what I want. And this just helps you avoid that situation. So the bottom line is leaving your primary creative media and marketing responsibilities to a volunteer. That can put you in a position where your church is limited in its capabilities for excellence. So the dream of most church leaders is to eventually reach a point where you hire an in-house graphics guy or media director or media team. And I have seen this, it's a very common, if you will, desire and ambition that I see amongst many, many church leaders out there and pastors, because that's what they're seeing in the big churches, the mega churches. That's what they're doing. They have entire teams of people that just produce their graphics and their videos, and it is a fantastic kind of dream. But really, we have to think about reality. We have to think about where you are at right now. And so, with that in mind, I want to talk about this concept of just hiring full time. And if we're going to hire full-time, we're going to hire a full-time creative professional, well, we have to consider that there's actually two breeds of creative professional. The first is the self-taught volunteer or guy who's already on your staff that's just kind of learning it on his own. And the second is what we would consider the trained professional who actually, got educated in it or has worked for a agency or something like that, a creative agency or firm. And so the advantages of hiring this trained professional is that they should be really, really good at their job, and they could really take your church's media to the next level. And in any area of investing into the right hire can be a game changer for your church. So I'm not going to hide the ball on that one. If you hired the right creative professional that was truly good at what they do, I mean, it could absolutely revolutionize your outreach, your marketing, and it could really help your church grow. But there are some downfalls to consider when it comes to hiring a true creative professional. Oftentimes, this trained professional, they enter into a career of creative marketing and media, and they're hoping to make a high income while pursuing what they love to do. Here is just a little bit of a breakdown of salaries that certain creatives expect. So with a graphic designer salary, if they have less than 5 years of experience, they're expecting to make upwards of $50,000 a year. If they have over 5 years of experience, well, they're going to be looking to make $58,000 or more a year. If you're a web app or developer, what they would call a junior web developer, meaning that they don't have a lot of experience or just getting started. Well, even for that, they're looking for $50,000 a year. And if somebody is a high level and they really know what they're doing in web development, the average salary is $75,000 a year, and the high, if you will, the upwards kind of peak is up at like $125,000, sometimes more a year. For a videographer or a producer, the entry level is about $45,000 or so. The average is about $75,000, and if you're looking for that experienced expert, they're looking for $100,000 plus. Let's talk about a social media manager. They would be, on average entering in at about $45,000, and if they're experienced, they're looking for more like $80,000. A creative media director, so someone who oversees the whole department. Well, the average about $88,000, and many times this is what your graphic designer is looking to become. They're entering as a designer or something like that, a position like that, and they're looking to become more of a creative director. And so the average, like I said, $88,000 and upwards of $158,000 for an experienced creative director. So you have to count these costs, and these creative professionals, though you might find exception, rarely are going to, if you will, work for cheap. A creative professional will also likely only want to work in their specific field. So if you're looking for more of a multi-purpose employee, this may not be the ideal choice. So in other words, if you say, I want somebody who can just do design, web, video, they can do it all, well, many times they say, no, I'm just a designer. That's all I do. I do graphic design. Or you might say, I need somebody, it's even more broad. You say, I need somebody to handle all those media needs, but I also need them to be a youth pastor or a worship leader or something like that. Well, the creative professional is going to say, oh no, that's way out of my wheelhouse. I do my design, or I do video, I do web. And so these are things you have to, again, consider. Another thing is that creative professionals are really good at what they do, and many times they tend to know it. And so what you could run into is sometimes and this is not universally true, but I am a creative professional, and so I am speaking from a little bit of my own pride. A lot of times you can run into this situation. I was very much this way, especially in my early days, that you don't really, you say, no, I'm good at this. I'm the one who's getting paid to do this. I'm educated in this. I've got the experience. And so you're kind of unwilling to hear others' feedback, and it can be very difficult sometimes for the creative, the artist, if you will, to execute somebody else's vision. They just kind of want to execute their own vision. And so this is just something to keep in mind. A lot of times this is a creative professional. This is the mindset that they can tend to bring, and look, I am in this world, but I will say I have worked with many creatives, and they all of us have a little bit of this in us, and some is much worse than others. And if you want to hire a true trained creative professional, you've got to have significant room in your budget, and be prepared that you will likely get someone who is very specific in just working in their particular field. So these are things you have to consider. In fact, hiring a trained full-time professional it's just a pipe dream for nearly any, and not just churches, really any organization, businesses and whatnot. Hiring somebody full time, I mean, it's reserved for kind of like the big dogs, if you will. However, there is another form of creative professional that may more likely be an option for you, and that is the self-taught volunteer, or maybe someone who's already working for you on your staff. And this is essentially the person who has taught themselves through YouTube, Google, and they've just kind of figured it out on their own. And look, I'm going to go through some pros and cons, but I'm just going to be the first to say I love these guys because I am one of these guys. I have no formal training on anything in terms of creative media. I think I took like one class in college that kind of touched on it, but I have no degrees, nothing like that. I mean, everything I have done has been self-taught, and I often like to make the joke that if I could get credit hours based off of like the amount of YouTube videos I've watched and so forth, then I'd have a PhD in what I do, because all I have done is just learn on my own. So here are some pros of working with someone who's more self-taught. Well, they're going to work at a much more affordable rate because many times they are learning on the job. And so they are going to, work at that more affordable rate, and not going to, want near and expect near as much as the trained professional would. They're likely going to be more willing to take on more responsibility because, again, they're learning on the job, and they're saying, okay, yeah, if I can learn something about, I've got Photoshop down, but I want to learn Illustrator better. Yeah, sure, I'm game. I'm game to give it a try, or I'm game to even try some video work or whatever it may be. And so they're going to be likely more willing to take on responsibility. But this can actually be a con because they will be prone to take on too much due to that lack of experience and just not understanding, the time required for certain projects. The media, the tech guys, they are often the most overworked members of your team. And look, this comes from this is coming from a heart of experience. Like, this has been me. And then due to that overwhelm or lack of experience, and sometimes even, unfortunately, a lack of talent, because I will say you can learn a lot of this, but there is a level of talent needed that just tends to come naturally, and not all people have that. So due to, this overwhelm, lacking that experience, lacking the talent, the quality of work can be maybe good, but not great. That said, some guys, they discover this talent and they really wind up being very, very good. So you're really rolling the dice, if you will, in terms of you're kind of taking your chances. You're saying, hey, this guy's interested, he's willing, he's got a Mac, so he must know how to operate, Photoshop and create cool stuff and videos, right? And so you give him a chance, and but hey, and then again, you're risking that chance of them being overwhelmed and not knowing how to handle certain things, not understanding the time commitments that are going to be needed to get things done, and so things start falling through the cracks for those reasons. Or maybe they're just not good. They're not as good as a true professional would be, and so things just like I said, they're kind of lackluster maybe. So again, you're kind of rolling the dice here, and many times though, when you do find someone who is good and they wind up being good at what they do, they discover this talent. And the overwhelming workload on top of, kind of discovering their talent, or maybe a combination of both, they lead to them resigning their position. So this is my story. And mine was more due to the overwhelm. It was just having to do with my things affecting my personal life. And I was working at a church and I had to leave. And it wasn't the church's fault. It was my fault because I was taking on too much and was overwhelming myself. And I know so many other creatives that this has happened to. I mean, I could name literally off the top of my head right now, I could probably name 5 to 10 guys that I know that this is what happened to them. And so this happens pretty commonly, and like I said, there's different reasons for why. Like I said, for me it was overwhelmed, but I know other guys that it was more for them about the fact that they realized, hey, I have this talent, and so now I'm going to essentially go and actually make a little bit more income than I can here working at this church. So this is just, again, stuff you have to consider. And speaking of considerations, when you're considering hiring this position as a church, your team, your media team there, whether they're volunteer or paid, you have to keep this in mind, that they're going to be serving in really one of two kind of domains. There is the ministerial domain. This is, the teaching, the preaching, greeting, worship, music, kind of the front-facing stuff, if you will, kids ministries, small groups, doing counseling, stuff like that. This is like kind of true ministry, and like I said, it's a little more front-facing. And then there's the operational stuff that's more behind the scenes. Your finances, budgeting, HR, your office and administrative, organization, scheduling, technology, IT, and then this is also where that creative media and marketing fits. And there's certainly going to be overlap between both of these domains, but when it comes to hiring, I have found that it's most ideal to hire exclusively for one or the other if possible. If you need someone to do both, then hire someone to oversee and direct rather than actually do the work. So in other words, instead of hiring someone to actually be your graphic designer and be your videographer, but also be your youth pastor and do all the work that involves in all of those things I just described, you would say, well, hey, I really want you to be worship pastor. I want you to be worship leader, whatever it may be. But I am going to have you also just oversee our media department, taking more of a leadership role and a role where they would then delegate, than actually, going in and doing the actual work. So here's some questions you have to ask. Can your church afford the growing rate? Going back to our last episode, can your church afford the going rate of a trained professional? And then when you do make this hire, what are you expecting them to do? Are you expecting them to oversee or to actually do the creative media work? Here's the bottom line. The vast majority of churches do not need, nor will they ever need, a full-time hire to handle their creative media. Now, there's some of you out there, I know that comes as a shock. You think, no, again, like that's the dream. But here's the truth. It's not a need for the vast majority of churches. And because here's the thing, even if you consider churches that are big churches, but the truth is that it's only like something like 2%, or no, it's lower than that. It's like 1%. I think it's like 0.5% of churches have run more than 2,000. That's the number. That puts you in the mega church category. These are the types of churches that have the budget to make these hires, and unless you are in that top 0.5%, that's not your church. And so needing to make a hire in this way that is full-time is almost certainly not going to be something that you need. Now, by way of review, delegating your church's media is great for some applications, but not a good idea for areas that require certain levels of talent and skill set. So delegating specifically to a volunteer, it can work in some areas, but we've talked about how others is not a good idea. Hiring someone full-time will often result in hiring someone who is either too expensive, or too inexperienced. So today, we're going to talk about the best approach to hiring for well over 99% of churches. Well, thanks again for joining us for this episode. And if you want to access the rest of this content, then you're going to want to make sure that you sign up for Church Advance HQ at churchadvancehq.com. That's churchadvancehq.com. Make sure that if you haven't yet, you're following us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you may listen to podcasts. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch video versions of each episode. We look forward to having you join us in the next episode as we continue to advance a reformation, a fellowship, partnership, and gospel hope amongst Bible-believing pastors and churches right here on Church Advance.